Thanks everybody, and welcome to this brief slide share video on holding difficult conversations. My name is Phil Jones, and I've been asked to run this course at quite a number of different local authorities. I want to congratulate you on coming along, really, because I think that having difficult conversations is at the core of the work that we do working with families and children. Not just the difficulties that we have in conversations with families, but also with each other, between agencies, and particularly at a time when resources are limited. So that's the first thing to say about holding difficult conversations, is that they're difficult by very, very nature. And we'll look at that as we go through the next 10 minutes. But welcome anyway. And you're probably watching this because you're thinking of, or you booked onto the Holding Difficult Conversations course, and you just want to get your head around it a bit. It's going to take about 10 minutes, I think, for us to look at some of the principles and a bit of a course introduction. Yeah, as I've said, that holding difficult conversations are at the centre of work with families, and that most of the work that we do is in a context which is challenging to family life, and I think we would all, as individuals, hold our own families and our own family life as being very, very important. The interventions that you bring, the contact you bring to families, it causes challenges of itself, and I know that you'd want to approach that respectfully. But I just want to acknowledge that we mostly want to avoid having conflict with people, and I think that's probably quite a good thing. But the work that we do, work that you do, requires you to perhaps say something different to a family than they prefer to hear. Maybe it's bringing a different view to something that you've observed or somebody else has observed. Maybe it's something about a professional opinion which says, well, actually, I think this should happen with your son or with your daughter. And we know how much we need to take that to those people with respect, because if we don't come with respect, they're simply not going to listen. So there's something really that we consider is the following, really, is that our own experiences are crucial. We will come having had an earlier life which will have had experiences of difficult conversations in our own families growing up in the early part of our career. And the chances are, at a younger age, we will develop habitual ways of doing things. And it's a caricature, but these might be characterized as being fight or flight, for example. We run away and we avoid, or we fight. And I when I do this training, I often refer to two lovely neighbours of mine who didn't speak for about 3 years because of an extension to somebody's house. And the issue for me was not that there was a disagreement about the extension, it was the fact that really they couldn't talk to one another about it. And these were, I think, both people, if you met them, would consider them to be quite strong, capable men, actually, on this occasion. And I think, gosh, I just watched this play out, and it's kind of heartbreaking. So quite often we would almost, and people have done research into this. So people, I think there was a research into some semi-serious research into middle managers a few years ago. People saying would you rather jump out of an airplane on a parachute and do a parachute jump, or have a really difficult conversation? And they put some scenarios there, and quite often people would rather have jumped out of a plane. So, if you are willing, if you're interested, if you're prepared to have difficult conversations, well, congratulations. There's something about our own agency and our professional expectations, or maybe even the culture in which we're working. If we think about the press, something goes wrong with children, then there's a lot of finger wagging, isn't there? You should have done something about it. How could this be allowed to continue? and we might have our own agency, might expect us to sort of get involved in something. And these are considerations. These are things that are going to be important to us, and will have an impact on how we respond. The third bullet point here is, I suppose I grew up, in the late 70s. I guess I became an adult, and then assertiveness was developing, and something was very, very important. Ways in which you could get your point across, tell people what was important to you, ask for things that you wanted, make your point. Really, really crucial. I think along the way, assertiveness has sort of got a bit distorted, sadly. And if we sort of say, well, have you met, I don't know, Ali on reception? He's assertive, isn't he? We don't often mean assertive. We often mean kind of aggressive or stroppy or even rude. And I think when we work with families, there has to be some give and take. There has to be some sharing and some listening, some clarity about our own beliefs, our own processes, and an ability and a willingness to address when people come back to those sorts of challenges. So assertiveness techniques are still very, very useful. But I think we have to be mindful of the fact that it's not just one way. It's not just me being assertive to you. It's about how I listen to you, and how prepared I am, and how I communicate that. It's something that people talk about. I hear this all the time with work with families. It's what I think of as the hard-soft continuum. I mean, this works with thinking about your own children as well. It works if you're a line manager or whatever. People say, I should have been harder. I'm trying the soft approach. Next time I'm going to be tougher. I think I need to sit back and listen a bit more and take a more of a softly approach. That's sort of running down one continuum, hard, soft. And actually, what we do every day in having these difficult conversations are much more complicated than that. They're much more faceted than that. I do think sometimes that the ideas of assertiveness and the expectations, the context, rather leads us to think about being hard. And sometimes we think, well, if we were hard, then and something goes wrong, well, that's okay because we told them what we thought. I think we have to, and we do think. In a more complex and nuanced way about the way in which we deal with these things. Co-construction, and I suppose is the kind of goal really. We go and visit a family with some ideas, with some thoughts, with some observations, with some questions, and what we really look to do is co-construct, by which I mean build together some sort of a plan which is good for the child, good for the family, and good for our responsibilities with our child and the family. And that's really what we're looking to do. And it's what we're looking to do when I do training on this, is to think about how we get into that position where people can actually hear us, reflect on the information that we bring, and work with us, allow us, if you like, to have those sorts of conversations. Which will help them to develop a plan for that child, for that family, which meets their needs and meets our needs, but also is one that they can really get on board. It's not just we don't come in with our plan and they don't like it and they're going to pretend. And I guess a lot of the conversations and worries about disguise compliance is just that. We came in with a plan. Or we tried to build a plan with them. They agreed because they wanted us to go away. Then there's a plan, and they pretend to do it, and we find out later that they haven't. And it's how do we do that? Really difficult things. The holy grail, if you like. How do we get to build relationships with families where we can really help them to work with us, or help us to work with them to come up with a plan which ensures the best outcome for children. And also a reassurance and clarity for our partner agencies. Okay, co-construction. So just on the back of that, I mean, a couple of things just to remember. If I go into my son's bedroom and tell him what I think of his housekeeping, does that mean that he's heard it? If he hears it, he's heard his dad shouting and saying that he's made a mess. is that really understanding that in terms of what that mess might mean for him or what that mess might mean for me? I don't think it does. And that if he does start to understand that I'm worried about him, that I'm concerned that he should look after himself, is that changing him? Because I think when we go and meet a family about a worry that we have or they have about their children, and what we really are about is helping to change them or helping them to change. Arguably, you can't change people. You can create an environment in which then they might change, would be what I would say. So, in having difficult conversations, particularly when it comes to conveying your worries or conveying ideas to a family, we have to consider the fact that we need to look very closely from their perspective about what is it that helps them change. There's so much around about this nowadays, about the neuroscience, about how people actually change, how people change opinions, political opinions. It's just fascinating. And there certainly is a line of thought which says that if person A believes one thing and person B believes something opposite, and person A argues to person B, with articulacy, well researched, well thought through, and they argue to tell person B that they're wrong. But person B, apart from being changed, going, oh my word, that person A is right. I've been wrong all along. I'm going to, change my ways. But actually, person B is more likely to hang on to their opinions even more strongly. Now, when we consider that as a whether it's a fact, it's an observation, certainly would be my observation in my life, then it's quite sobering for the way in which we work with families, the way in which we work with our colleagues, the way in which we work with our families, our own families. Okay, so saying isn't hearing, hearing isn't understanding, understanding isn't changing. Thank you. What happened is that in I think it was 2016, 2017, I worked with a group of a couple of groups of professionals who worked with children in and around East Sussex County Council, and with the kind of conversation we had in those groups was what makes excellent difficult conversations. What makes us good at it? What are the times that we were good? What do we do? And we came up with these sort of 6 kind of principles. The first is a whole business about how we establish and build rapport. And of course, that stuff is very, very straightforward when we have it. But when people are anxious, suspicious, or angry with us, then that's difficult. So how do we build rapport even when people are really cross with us? There's something about clearly describing our worries about children. How do we articulate the worries in a way that's understandable? And when I do the training, we use some signs of safety principles. We look at danger statements and safety goals, worry statements, if you like. What are we worried about? How can we convey that in an understandable way? How can we convey what we hope for in the future for those children? Very, very useful stuff. There's something about the whole dialogue with families that really, and I suppose I think there's probably thousands of different little ways that we can help that process, and we look at a few. If there is a surefire winner, it all seems to be listening, but we know how tough that is. Number 4 was about managing conflict successfully. We look at some specific techniques for managing conflict, particularly using non-violent communication techniques, which is really, 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 really good stuff. And there's something about kind of different levels of engagement. I think that takes us back to the co-construction. How do we get to that point where people, when maybe maybe what we really, really, really want is that we want them to, we want them to lead the conversation. We want them to lead the difficult conversation towards a better outcome for their children. And then number 6 is what we want to include in any kind of learning program, which really looks at experience, and the conversation that I like to have with people's experiences, what has worked well, and what might be even better if. And we know that this is difficult work, so the way in which certainly I like to approach it is with interest, and is with respect, and with compassion. So there we are. These are some of the learning principles, practice principles rather, that we use in the course. It's something I like people to go away from this video with, and it's something I think is very, very useful when it comes to having difficult conversations, is what we kind of say to ourselves. I like to think they're almost culture. One way of defining culture is, the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. So these are the sort of things I like people to say about themselves. We are skilled professionals doing the best we can to help families and children. I mean, to be honest, we know it's not, we haven't got magic wands. It's really, really difficult, and we're not always right. We don't always get the result that we want. But we're certainly doing the best we can. And then I think it's useful to think about families. Families are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have at their disposal. Useful to think that people are doing the best they can. It's just more useful than thinking that they're not trying, or that they're incapable or whatever. Sometimes we get what we focus on, and I think it's useful to be able to sit with people and think, well, it's damaging, harmful, not as good for this child as we'd like it to be, but actually at the moment they're doing the best they can. How can we help them to do even better? People generally do want the best for their children. They do. There's a very small and dangerous proportion of those who don't. But generally people do. And this is a challenging notion, but nevertheless a useful one. People are willing to collaborate with you if we can just find the way that they can best help connect with us. It's about, we can't change other people, but maybe we can be really flexible in the way in which we communicate. How can we communicate? How can we present ourselves and our position and our worries or whatever in the way that allows people to best collaborate with us? Yeah, difficult, useful stuff. Just want to say thank you. I hope to meet people sometime down the line on some training courses. Looking forward to those conversations. Thanks very much for watching. This is Phil Jones from Workplace Dynamics Limited, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.